In this video, I want to share with you some secrets about working with myofascial lines. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and contained within these images are so many secrets and insights that you can start to use in your clinic to get better clinical results. Now, if you haven't done this already, go to my website and download this. You can store it on your phone, and it makes a great reference tool in clinic. It's a great study aid, and it's one of the quickest ways I know to learn about how to apply myofascial lines to your acupuncture practice. Now, the things that I'm about to share can be used with any system of acupuncture. You can use this with TCM, you can use it with the balance method and Tong's points, which is where I come from. And you can also use it for other styles as well. This works for Japanese styles. You can integrate it into that. You can integrate it into 5 elements. And the reason that this applies to so many different styles of acupuncture is because it's all based in anatomy, and specifically myofascial anatomy. Now, one thing to understand before we dig in further is that oftentimes people might think that this really only applies to musculoskeletal conditions or painful conditions involving the musculoskeletal system. However, this information can also be applied to internal disorders, and it speaks volumes about the internal-external relationships that we speak about in Chinese medicine. So when we talk about this deep front line, this is the internal myofascial system, and it explains so many things about these internal-external relationships that exist. Now, to get started though, let's start with the superficial back line, and we can see that it looks a lot like the urinary bladder meridian. Now, along the superficial back line, we'll have a series of points, the points that we're all familiar with that are a part of the bladder meridian. But what this image demonstrates is that the particular muscles along this line are very specific, and the muscles are all connected through the fascia. Now, let's contrast this with the superficial front line, because it's really important to think of these different myofascial lines as having yin-yang relationships. So the superficial back line and the superficial front line have a yin-yang relationship, and we may think of the back line as being the yang line and the front line as being on the yin side. And then we can also see that this lateral line looks a lot like the gallbladder meridian. And if we move inward from the lateral line, then we reach the deep front line. And this deep front line really connects to all of the leg yin channels. So the liver meridian, the spleen meridian, and the kidney meridian. Now, the yin-yang relationship between the lateral line and this deep front line, we know as the relationship between the gallbladder and the liver. However, there's a lot of other things that we can know about this connection between the lateral line and the deep front line when we're thinking in terms of myofascial lines. So the yin-yang relationship between the superficial back line and the superficial front line is really important to understand and applies to a lot of conditions. So if someone bends over to pick something up and injures their back, what that does is that strains that superficial back line. But then in these types of cases and many other type of chronic conditions that involve back pain, we find chronic contraction along the superficial front line. So when the superficial front line starts to have chronic contractions, those chronic contractions might get held in the SCM up here in the neck, as is the case in a forward shifted head. That can cause pain in the back of the neck and the shoulders and into the upper back. And then if there's this hunching over posture that occurs with age, or when we bend over to pick something up and injure our back, we get contraction here in the rectus abdominis, and that can be related to pain in the back channels and in the lumbar area. We also see conditions where there's chronic contraction in the quads, and that's related to locked knees. And we can also speak of numerous other types of conditions. So understanding the yin-yang relationship between these lines, it also helps us to understand structural dynamics. And this is a really positive thing about thinking in terms of myofascial lines, is it allows us to equate our traditional meridian theory to myofascial anatomy and interrelated muscle groups. And then from that, we can start to get a better handle on structural issues and the way that they can be related to a client's conditions. Now, many of us aren't used to thinking of that if we're acupuncturists, but structural disorders are a very common thing, and the more that we understand that, then the better we can apply our traditional methods, our traditional points and point combinations to get better results. Now, a very common thing in acupuncture, and they teach this in TCM, we talk about this in Dong's points and the balance method. The Japanese systems will also use this, as well as other systems. And this is the theory that we can put a needle in a meridian and it's going to influence that whole line. So for instance, we can do points on the bladder channel down around the ankle, and that's going to affect the muscles up in the neck in the bladder channel. Similarly, we can needle points on the stomach meridian in the lower leg, and that's going to affect the internal organs, the spleen in the stomach, and other organs as well. So we have this idea that we can needle a meridian to affect the other end of the meridian, so the distal end of the meridian, as well as the internal organs that relate to that.